I met Caleb at a friend's backyard cookout on a warm Saturday in Austin, the kind with paper plates, cheap speakers, and someone always arguing over the grill. He wasn't flashy. He was the guy helping carry coolers, making sure nobody's cup stayed empty too long. When he talked to me, he actually listened, like he wanted to remember every small thing I said. After a few years of dating men who treated conversations like a chore, that felt like a miracle. The first months moved fast in that sweet, dizzy way. He'd pick me up after work with tacos from the same food truck near my office because I once said I liked their green sauce. He'd send voice notes while walking his dog, narrating the neighborhood drama like it was our own little show. He made me feel chosen. Not just liked, chosen. And when my mom teased that I was smiling at my phone too much, I rolled my eyes and said, "Let me be happy for once." I didn't notice the cracks at first because he covered them with warmth. The first time he mentioned money, he did it softly, like he was ashamed. We were sitting on my couch with a half-finished movie playing in the background when he admitted his small business account was tight. He said it like a confession. He told me he was close to a big contract, that he just needed time, that everything would be fine in a few weeks. Then he squeezed my hand and said, "I hate asking for anything. I don't want to lose what we're building." That sentence did something to me. What we're building. It sounded like a house you could walk into, a future you could touch. He wasn't asking me for cash. He was asking me to believe. And I did. My mom didn't. Neither did my sisters. They spotted the shift before I did, the way women in my family always seemed to smell danger like smoke. At Sunday dinner, my oldest sister, Paige, asked what kind of business Caleb ran, and I explained it in the simplest terms I could, because honestly I didn't understand all of it myself. My younger sister, Leah, pressed harder, asking why his big contract was always coming soon but never arriving. My mom didn't raise her voice, didn't insult him. She just stared at me like she was trying to reach through my skull and switch my brain back on. When I told them Caleb wanted me to sign as a guarantor for a short-term lease on equipment, the table went quiet. The only sound was the clink of my fork against the plate. My mom asked, calmly, "Do you know what that means?" Paige said, "It means if he can't pay, they come for you." Leah added, "And they don't care about your love story when they do it." I laughed, trying to lighten it, but it came out thin. I said it wasn't like that, that Caleb was responsible, that he'd never let it get to that point. I told them he was embarrassed and trying to build something. I said relationships are about support. It felt good to say it out loud because it made me sound mature, generous, like the kind of woman who didn't run the second life got inconvenient. My mom didn't argue. That was the part that should have scared me. She just nodded slowly and said, "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what happens. People don't plan to drown. They just keep walking until the water is over their head." Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand so tight it almost hurt, like she was trying to anchor me. That night I drove home angry at them for not seeing Caleb the way I saw him. I replayed every kind thing he'd done, every promise, every soft look. I told myself my family had always been suspicious of anyone outside our circle. I told myself they were projecting their fears onto my relationship. And still, when I got into bed, I stared at the ceiling longer than usual. Not because I doubted Caleb exactly. It was more like I doubted how easy it was for me to say yes. In the dark, my mother's words kept looping, quiet and steady, like a warning siren I didn't want to hear. The office where I signed the papers didn't look like the place where people lose their lives. It looked like any other strip mall business suite, beige walls, a sad plant by the window, a receptionist tapping on her keyboard without looking up. Caleb walked in with that confident posture he used when he wanted me to believe everything was handled. He kissed my forehead like we were just running errands. I had my ID in my wallet and a lump in my throat I couldn't explain. While we waited, He talked about the future like he always did, moving in together, taking a trip up to Colorado, maybe even starting a family one day, when things calmed down. He kept his voice light, but his knee bounced non-stop, a tiny betrayal of the calm face he was showing me. When the agent slid the documents across the table, the words looked sharper than they should have. Guarantor. Liability. Default. I asked what would happen if, for whatever reason, Caleb couldn't keep up with payments for a couple months. The agent answered like he'd said it 1,000 times, then you'd be responsible. It was simple. Cold. Final. Caleb reached for my hand under the table and squeezed. He didn't speak over me, didn't rush me. That almost made it worse, because it felt like he was being respectful while still guiding me where he wanted. He said softly, "Babe, I wouldn't ask if I didn't have to. This is just to get us through a small gap. 90 days, max. Then it's done." 90 days sounded harmless. 3 months. A season. I thought about my family's faces at that dinner table, and for a second I almost stood up. But I pictured Caleb walking out alone, embarrassed and disappointed, and I couldn't do it. I convinced myself that backing out would be betrayal, that love was proven in moments like this. So I signed. The pen scratched over paper, and the moment I lifted it, something in the room felt different, like the air had shifted weight. Caleb exhaled, a long breath he'd been holding for weeks. He smiled too wide and thanked me too many times on the drive back, promising it would all be worth it. I told myself the heavy feeling in my chest was just nerves. The next few weeks were where the real change happened. It wasn't dramatic. It was small things, like how he stopped showing up early just to spend time with me before work. He still texted, but the messages got shorter. He started taking calls outside, stepping onto the balcony with his back turned, lowering his voice until I couldn't make out words. When I asked what was going on, he'd say, "Just business stuff," like that explained everything. One evening, I suggested we go to my mom's for dinner. Caleb's face tightened in a way that lasted only a second, but I noticed it. He said he was tired. Then he said, "Your family doesn't really like me." I told him they were just protective. He laughed, but it didn't sound like a joke. "Protective," he repeated, like it was a personal insult. His family, on the other hand, began appearing like they were suddenly invested in our relationship. His mother, Diane, invited us over for Sunday lunch. She hugged me too long and called me sweetheart in a syrupy way that didn't match her eyes. His sister, Brooke, asked questions about my job, my house, my car, little details disguised as casual conversation. His dad barely spoke, but he watched me like he was measuring something. At first, I tried to take it as a good sign. Maybe they were finally welcoming me. But there was a pattern. They asked about what I owned and what I was responsible for, and they never asked what I wanted. Diane praised me for being the kind of girlfriend who stands by her man. Brooke joked that I was the adult in the relationship, and everyone laughed like that was cute instead of alarming. Every time I walked into their home, conversation seemed to pause for half a heartbeat. Then they'd restart with forced smiles, like they were switching channels. Brooke would say, "We were just talking about bills," or "just family stuff." It always sounded practiced. I told myself I was paranoid, that I was looking for problems because my sisters had planted suspicion in my head. But then came the comments about sacrifice. Diane said it like it was wisdom passed down through generations. A woman holds the family together. Sometimes she has to carry the weight. Brooke added, "Men get stressed. You can't nag them. You just support them and let them figure it out." I didn't argue. I smiled, nodded, tried to be easy. I kept thinking if I proved I was loyal, everything would settle. I thought loyalty was my shield. I didn't realize it was the rope they were quietly wrapping around me, one friendly conversation at a time. The first sign arrived in a plain envelope that looked like junk mail. I almost tossed it on the counter unopened, but my name was printed in bold, and something about that made my stomach tighten. It was a notice about a missed payment. I read it twice, then a third time, like the words might rearrange into something less serious if I stared hard enough. When I called Caleb, he didn't sound surprised. He sounded annoyed, like the letter was an inconvenience, not a warning. "It's a system thing," he said. "The payment went through late. They always send those out automatically." He told me not to worry, told me he'd handle it. Then he changed the subject and started talking about a game on TV like the conversation was over. I wanted to trust him because the alternative was terrifying. So I did what a lot of women do when they're scared. I swallowed it and smiled. I told myself I was being dramatic. I told myself it was normal for paperwork to look worse than reality. 2 weeks later, another letter came. This one was more formal. The words were sharper. "Past due. Final notice." I stared at it at my kitchen table while my coffee went cold. This time, when I called, Caleb said he was in a meeting and couldn't talk. He texted later, "Babe, relax. I'm fixing it." That word, relax, made something in me snap. Not outwardly. I didn't scream. I just felt my body go tense, like a muscle locking into place. I drove to his place after work, unannounced, and he wasn't home. I waited in my car in the parking lot for almost an hour before he showed up, walking fast, phone pressed to his ear. When he saw me, his face flickered with panic before he smoothed it into a smile. Inside, he gave me the same speech with extra polish. "I'm close," he said. "One big payment is coming in and it'll wipe everything. You know how business is." He kissed my forehead and held me for a moment like that was the solution. For a second, I leaned into it, because I wanted comfort more than truth. Then I started noticing the other things. A new watch on his wrist when he said he was broke. A restaurant receipt in his trash from a place we'd never gone because it was too expensive. When I asked, he got defensive. He accused me of not believing in him. He said, "Do you want me to fail?" like my questions were curses. The 90 days didn't feel like 90 days. They felt like a countdown I couldn't see, a clock ticking behind the walls. Letters came faster. Phone calls started. I'd be at work, trying to focus, when an unknown number would flash on my screen. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. When I did, the voice on the other end wasn't emotional. It was professional, patient, and persistent. They weren't angry. They were certain. And then the worst letter arrived, notice of legal action. I remember sitting on my living room floor with the envelope ripped open beside me. My house was quiet, but my ears rang like I'd been hit. I called my mom, and my voice cracked before I even said hello. She didn't yell. She just went silent for a moment, like she was praying she'd misunderstood. Then she told me to come over. Immediately. That night, my sisters were there too. Paige paced the kitchen, furious, while Leah looked like she might cry. My mom kept her voice steady, asking questions like a detective. "What exactly did you sign? What does the contract say? How much is owed? Has he shown you proof of payments?" I didn't have answers. I had excuses. I had screenshots of sweet texts and vague promises. When I confronted Caleb again, face to face, the man I thought I knew wasn't there. He didn't sit beside me and talk it through. He stood near the door like he wanted an exit. His eyes kept flicking away. He sighed like I was exhausting him. He tried shifting blame right away. "You knew what you were signing," he said, as if I'd signed to ruin myself. Then he said, "My family's been helping, but it's not enough." That was the first time he admitted his family was involved at all, and it hit me like ice water. I asked what he meant. He shrugged. They can't keep bailing me out. They have their own responsibilities. The way he said responsibilities made my throat tighten. Like mine didn't matter. The repossession happened early in the morning. I heard the tow truck before I saw it. I ran outside in pajama pants, barefoot on the cold driveway, and watched my car being pulled away like it was nothing. I tried arguing with the man doing his job, but he didn't even look at me like a person. He looked at paperwork. I stood there shaking while a neighbor pretended not to watch through their blinds. Losing the house was slower and worse. It wasn't one dramatic moment. It was a series of humiliations, more notices, more deadlines, more calls. And then, eventually, the day I packed boxes and stared at the blank walls of the home I'd worked years for, realizing it was no longer mine. The strangest part was how calm Caleb became once everything started falling apart. It was like he'd stopped fighting because the outcome was the one he expected. He'd say things like, "This is just how it goes sometimes," or "We'll figure it out," but he never said we like he meant it. He said it like a line. By the time the 90 days were over, I didn't recognize my life. I didn't recognize myself. I had a suitcase, a pile of documents, and a boyfriend who looked at me like I was a problem he needed to escape. And somewhere deep down, beneath the shock and shame, a new thought started forming, quiet but sharp. This wasn't an accident. Not all of it. I didn't find out the truth in some dramatic confrontation. There was no shouting match or sudden confession. It slipped out the way ugly truths usually do, carelessly, from someone who assumed I already knew my place in the story. It happened at a small family gathering I shouldn't have gone to. Caleb had stopped answering my calls consistently, but his mother invited me over anyway, saying we needed to talk like adults. I arrived already exhausted, carrying the weight of everything I'd lost. The house felt the same as always, clean and warm, but I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. At some point, Caleb stepped outside to take a call. I stayed in the kitchen with his aunt, Karen, a woman who liked to talk too much when she was nervous. She poured herself another glass of wine and shook her head, laughing under her breath. "Well," she said, "at least it worked out the way your mom planned." I asked her what she meant, and she looked genuinely confused. "You know," she said, lowering her voice, "having you as the guarantor. That was smart. Saved everyone else." The room went quiet in my head, like someone had shut a door. I asked her to explain, my voice steadier than I felt. She hesitated, then shrugged. She told me it had been obvious Caleb was sinking financially months before I ever signed anything. His parents had refused to co-sign. His sister had refused too. They didn't want their credit touched, their assets at risk. When I came into the picture, stable job, house, clean record, they saw a solution. Karen realized too late that she'd said too much. She tried to backtrack, saying she assumed I was in on it, that I'd agreed to help. But the damage was done. Every strange moment snapped into place. The sudden kindness. The questions about what I owned. The praise for my sacrifice. It wasn't admiration. It was approval that the plan was working. When Caleb came back inside, I looked at him differently. I asked him, calmly, if his family had known how bad things were before I signed. His silence was louder than any answer. He rubbed his face, sat down heavily, and said, "They just didn't want me to fail." I asked where I fit into that picture. He didn't answer. His mother tried to intervene, saying they never meant for me to lose everything, that things got out of hand. But there was no apology in her voice, just discomfort that the truth was out. She spoke like this was unfortunate, not cruel. Like I was collateral damage, not a person they had watched walk into a trap. I left without raising my voice. I drove until my hand started shaking and had to pull over. The betrayal hurt more than the loss of my house or my car. Money can disappear. Trust doesn't just vanish, it rots when you realize it was never real. I wasn't unlucky. I was chosen. And not in the way I once believed. After that day, Caleb stopped pretending. He didn't officially break up with me, but he faded out in pieces, missed calls, delayed replies, excuses that sounded recycled. When I showed up once, desperate for clarity, he told me I was too emotional and that he needed space to deal with his stress. The irony almost made me laugh. His family erased me quickly. I was blocked on social media, uninvited from gatherings, spoken about only in hushed tones. I knew this because a mutual friend told me, awkwardly, that Diane had described me as unstable and overwhelming. Apparently, losing everything makes you inconvenient. I moved into my mom's guest room with boxes stacked against the wall like evidence of a life paused. Explaining the situation never got easier. People asked careful questions, and I gave simplified answers because the full story sounded too stupid, too humiliating. I could see it in their eyes, the moment they wondered how I'd let this happen. At night, the thoughts were relentless. I replayed every warning, every comment I'd brushed off. I thought about my sister's faces at that dinner table, my mom's quiet fear. Shame wrapped itself around everything. Not just shame for trusting him, but for trusting myself. There were days I couldn't bring myself to get dressed. Days when opening the mail made my chest tighten. The legal calls kept coming, polite and firm. I learned quickly that institutions don't care about manipulation or heartbreak. They care about signatures. And yet, something unexpected happened in that lowest place. The fog started to lift. Slowly, painfully, I began to see the pattern, not just in Caleb and his family, but in me. How easily I took responsibility for other people's problems. How often I confused loyalty with self-erasure. My mom never said, "I told you so." She just made coffee in the mornings and asked what the next step was. Paige helped me organize paperwork. Leah sat on the bed with me and talked about anything but the mess when I needed distraction. For the first time in months, I felt supported instead of used. The humiliation didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It stopped being something that crushed me and started becoming something that sharpened me. I wasn't broken. I was waking up. Rebuilding didn't start with confidence. It started with logistics. I met with a lawyer who spoke plainly and didn't sugarcoat anything. I learned what I could fight and what I had to accept. I made lists, budgets, plans that stretched months into the future. Small steps, but solid ones. I cut contact with Caleb completely. No explanations. No closure conversations. I blocked his number and every member of his family. It felt brutal at first, like I was being cruel. Then it felt necessary. Peace, I learned, doesn't come from understanding people who hurt you. It comes from removing their access to you. Emotionally, I had to unlearn things that once felt like virtues. I stopped believing that love requires sacrifice without limits. I stopped equating patience with endurance. I learned to pause when something felt off instead of explaining it away. Trust didn't disappear, it became selective. Telling my story was the final step. Not for revenge, and not for sympathy, but for clarity. Saying it out loud stripped it of its power. I stopped whispering the parts that made me uncomfortable. I named what happened: manipulation, calculation, betrayal. I was supposed to carry the blame so everyone else could stay clean. That was the plan. But plans fail when the scapegoat refuses to stay silent. I lost a house, a car, and a relationship, but I didn't lose myself. I found her again, stronger, less naive, and no longer willing to bleed quietly for someone else's comfort. My life doesn't look like it did before. It looks harder in some ways, simpler in others. But it's mine. And no one gets to sign it away again.